David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
For months, I've been talking about what seems to be kind of a pressing desire from Donald Trump to bomb North Korea, because it would really serve so many purposes that to Trump, according to Trump's own internal logic, would be really important. Bombing North Korea might make Trump seem strong and powerful, and it would prove that he has the biggest button, I think is what he used to refer to it. Take attention away from the scandals, right? The lack of accomplishments of the Trump administration. And then on some level, a nation at war, at least initially, right? In the long term, it didn't quite work out for George W. Bush, but at least initially, a nation at war, whatever that even means in 2017, often will rally behind the president, which might help Donald Trump's approval rating woes, which are not going away. But he hasn't done it yet, right? Donald Trump hasn't yet struck North Korea, and we may now be learning why, because according to new reports in the Telegraph and the Wall Street Journal, it's been Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis who have been urging Trump not to strike North Korea, something that by all accounts he has wanted to do 100% as we imagined was going on in his mind. And interestingly, these reports say that Donald Trump's National Security Adviser, I like to call him the not yet indicted Michael Flynn, H.R. McMaster, he reportedly is in favor of striking North Korea. He wanted to do what's called a bloody nose strategy. That means that when North Korea does one of their typical provocations, you immediately and sharply lash out in violence. And the analogy of calling it a bloody nose strategy is you punch someone in the nose immediately when they insult you, for example, to show them that you're not going to be pushed around or something like that, I guess. And these reports also are renewing allegations that Rex Tillerson's approach is really not pleasing Trump very much. And there's every indication that Rex Tillerson is still on thin ice. We recently heard, there was a CNN interview I saw a few days ago where one analyst said, Tillerson is not going to last through 2018. Now, Tillerson, when asked, said he has no plans to leave. But saying I have no plans to leave is different than I can guarantee you I won't be fired. But that's sort of a sidebar to what we're talking about here, which is North Korea. The truth is, Tillerson and Jim Mattis are correct to be cautious because in the end, North Korea does have nuclear weapons. Whether they are telling the truth or not that they could strike the U.S. or U.S. assets or U.S. allies, it's actually kind of irrelevant because the possibility is there for them to strike someone with their nukes. And that's not something that the United States wants to provoke or be connected to being the catalyst for. And Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis believes, and I agree with him, that if Kim Jong-un did a retaliation, the likes of which he'd be capable of doing somewhere, right? Not necessarily on U.S. soil, but somewhere, that it would be, quote, a war more serious in terms of human suffering than anything we've seen since 1953, with a potential death toll in the millions. Imagine the dynamic in the White House, right? And again, I happen to agree with Tillerson and Mattis. A strike is a bad idea for a number of reasons, but there's a case to be made for H.R. McMaster's position. Reasonable people, competent people, people that are fit to serve and make these types of decisions, they could have a reasonable conversation about what the right approach with North Korea is. But it's not like Trump is sitting there with these guys participating in the discussions like an adult. I imagine, Pat, that Trump is sitting there while Tillerson and Mattis are arguing against a strike and McMaster is outlining the possible benefits. I imagine Trump sitting there with a TV remote in his hand, watching Fox and Friends saying, yeah, let's do it. Let's bomb them. Give me the button to press, guys.
Yeah, I'd imagine he's leaning towards McMaster's side. But it is interesting how Tillerson and Mattis, 1 year into the presidency, have become the voices of reason here.
I know.
I mean, neither are progressive champions, to say the least.
No.
And yet it's probably best that they stay in this administration.
And further, the idea of Tillerson as someone in a cabinet is absolutely horrifying in terms of what it means about the kleptocracy, right? You're talking about a lifelong oil executive whose philosophy, much like Trump's, has been self-enrichment and greed and doing what's best for him, no matter who he has to receive a medal from, in the case of Vladimir Putin, the fact that someone like that, we say, this is one of the more reasonable voices. I don't want to normalize Tillerson, but it's true. Compared to Trump, he is more reasonable.
The CEO of ExxonMobil, who was probably only put in there in the first place to secure that $500 billion oil deal with Russia.
Or whatever other one of his different deals that he had on the table was attractive to Trump. This is all very scary news, right? The news that the president is this interested and this focused on striking North Korea is not good. It's a strike that would be of questionable benefit to anybody, meaning it's unclear if we did a strike like this, what the benefit is to us or to our allies or to the civilians of North Korea, who I guess, are we still claiming, Pat, that we want to do what's best for the civilians of North Korea? I mean, Trump, I guess, is sort of saying that, but I don't know that anybody really believes that. And we've now learned, and I guess this is in the world of really flaccid silver linings, I guess it's good that there's someone trying to prevent Trump from striking North Korea haphazardly, although it's unclear whether they're going to be effective over the long term. Not good, erratic, irrational. I don't know what other adjectives I would assign to it. Let's talk a little bit about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and golden boy, son-in-law of Donald Trump, Jared Kushner, husband of Ivanka Trump. To reset the backstory for you on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in case you've forgotten, Trump campaigned on, I'm going to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And you, at the time, might have wondered, wait, people who actually know about the conflict and understand the conflict have been unable to solve the conflict. Why is it Donald Trump, who knows nothing about it, is going to be able to solve it? Well, part of Trump's reasoning was that Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and Ambassador David Friedman were going to be able to solve the entire thing. Now, the reality has been the exact opposite of that. Jared Kushner, completely incompetent. Friedman, the last person who should be involved in that discussion. He actually said at one point that he believes there should be more Israeli settlements and was a very loud voice in the push for moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. All terrible ideas. And from very early on in this administration, Jared Kushner was involved in shaping policy around the Middle East related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In fact, when Trump went on that first, now infamous, diplomatic trip to Israel and other parts of the Middle East, Jared Kushner was right there because he was Trump's guy, I guess, in the area. We've now learned through very good reporting by the New York Times that just before that trip, right, just before Jared Kushner went with Donald Trump to the Middle East to be involved in negotiating American policy there, Kushner's family real estate company received $30 million from Menora Mivtachim, which is an insurance company that happens to be one of Israel's largest financial institutions. Maybe a conflict of interest. Now, the $30 million deal was not public. It added new equity to 10 Maryland apartment buildings that Jared Kushner's company controls. So let's break down what is and what is not with regard to this $30 million. Number one, I'm not saying, nor is there evidence that this was illegal, okay? The law is actually really, really narrow on this, and it doesn't seem that federal ethics laws were violated by this. It doesn't appear, nor am I suggesting that Jared Kushner personally negotiated the $30 million deal. But Kushner knows he has a stake in this business. He knows that he will make a bunch of money from this deal. So what I am saying is that this could be the most biased and partial group of people involved in the negotiation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, to the extent that there's actually any negotiation going on, and it's unclear that there is. And to go back to the very beginning, the story from Trump was, we are going to fix the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Jared Kushner and David Friedman are going to negotiate, and the U.S. is going to be the referee, the arbiter of solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. To be an arbiter, or at least to be a potentially effective arbiter, there needs to be some credibility to the idea that you're not coming in as a biased party in the negotiations. It's like the referee in a sporting event. You need an unbiased person calling the fouls. We know that Trump's ambassador, David Friedman, has the position of wanting more settlements by Israel in the disputed territories. It's an outrageous and extreme position, and it immediately signals him as not a credible arbiter. We know that Donald Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, when in fact it is still a disputed territory in the conflict, it's completely partial to the Israelis. And there could be no better proof that the United States cannot be an unbiased arbiter of peace talks in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And now, sort of the cherry on top, we've learned that Jared Kushner's family businesses are profiting from doing business with a major Israeli financial company. And he, Pat, is going to be the guy who solves the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's absolutely laughable.
And there have been so many moments where we've wondered, why doesn't just Jared Kushner resign, right? Because when he got caught lying for his national security clearance, or maybe when like the Don Jr., Natalia Veselnitskaya news broke about that meeting in Trump Tower he was involved in, we thought, you know, he could probably leave with some sort of grace. He could resign, and because he's part of the Trump family, he could go to the family business. He could work with the Kushner family again. Now we realize that it's not because he doesn't want to be embarrassed so much as that he's profiting from this presidency.
He doesn't need to leave the White House in order to keep working for the family business. And I mean, another part of it might be, according to Michael Wolff's book, Fire and Fury, Ivanka and Kushner know the deep you-know-what that they're in, but that they feel that they just can't leave. Like, in other words, that because of they're in completely intractable positions in that Trump administration, and they have to be there. Anyway, if you're going to wait around hoping that there's consequences to Jared Kushner for being involved in this, forget it, right? I mean, former Vice President Dick Cheney was directly involved with Halliburton financially, which supplied the American military. He pushed for war in Iraq, a war that greatly enriched Halliburton. There were no consequences. There's not going to be any consequences here.
Yeah, Donald Trump is pushing that tax plan that ended up benefiting him greatly, too.
Yeah, there's just never repercussions. Forget it if the idea is repercussions. And of course, there's always projection, right? Is there anything that Trump has accused Hillary Clinton of doing that his administration hasn't done? He was accusing Hillary Clinton of taking money from foreign countries and foreign businesses. And here are Trump's own inner circle family members doing the exact same thing. It's just politics as usual at warp speed, right? That's what we're learning. Drain the swamp was actually the opposite. It was fill the swamp. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at dpakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. We'll take a quick break and be back with more after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Don Norrie. Don, thank you. Thanks to Don and all of our new members in 2018 and all of our longtime sustaining members, some of whom are in they're entering their 8th year as members. In fact, in April, we will have our first ever 8-year member of the David Pakman Show, which is truly, truly incredible. Thanks to everybody. You can sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. You can also make a pledge of as little as $1 per month through Patreon, or Patreon, as I heard someone call it online. That's a new one. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Okay, I want to talk about something that's been coming up more and more. I'm getting more and more tweets and emails and comments not calling me a Jew liar. That number of those is relatively stable.
Yeah,
You'll be pleased to know, Pat. But more and more tweets and emails and comments on YouTube saying something along the lines of, hey, David, you should be thanking Trump, not complaining about him, because his presidency is helping shows like yours. This is absolutely and completely correct, at least the part that, as I said before the election, I don't want Trump to win. I thought it would have been best for the country that Trump not be president. But I'm aware that if Trump had won, I was aware that if Trump won, I'm aware that because Trump did win, it's way better for programs like the David Pakman Show. There's no doubt about that. But so then what, right? I should pretend as though I support Trump's politics because he's been good for our show. I should not criticize his atrocious behavior and his lack of competence and lack of fitness to serve as president because, yeah, our audience has grown and our membership has grown as people have rallied around and organized against the president of the United States. And the reason I'm talking about it today is because I'm seeing it more and more. It's being said to me with a higher and higher frequency, David, your show is growing as fast as it is because of Trump so lay off the criticism of him. What sense does that make, right?
Yeah.
If there's one thing that I do here, it's that I call it the way I see it, no matter who's in office, no matter what is going on, right? It doesn't even compute to me that because Trump being president rather than Hillary being president has helped us to grow, my coverage of Trump should be adjusted in that way. I don't even understand what argument it is that's being made.
The logic doesn't hold up, because if you're saying that our criticisms of Trump is what is making the show be successful, wouldn't we want to continue that rather than praise him? If we started praising him, then I think our viewership would go down.
Well, there's value to being in the opposition, right? It's very different doing a show. It was very different doing the David Pakman Show under the George W. Bush administration than it was under the Obama administration. Sure. But that doesn't mean that we didn't have endless criticisms of President Obama, but it's a different type of criticism when you are, I guess, sort of closer to the politics of the person in the White House. What kind of program would it be if I said, well, this Trump thing has been so good for us that we should really lay off the guy and kind of like pretend he's doing good things? No, being in the opposition to Trump is part of why people are choosing to be solid, to choosing solidarity with us. Being in the opposition has a sort of cachet that is unique and beneficial, but we've been doing this too long to change the scope of the show based on who's in office. We praise those in office when they deserve praise, no matter who they are. We criticize those in office when that's what's called for, period. I even actually started getting emails, Pat, saying, David, the reason you're saying it's better for Democrats if Trump stays in isn't because Mike Pence would be worse. It's because you need Trump so that your show keeps growing. The show's been growing for 10 years, right? Donald Trump wasn't president for most of that time. I believe that it could backfire for Trump to leave, genuinely. I honestly believe that the left might benefit from a scandal-ridden Trump staying in the Oval Office, and yet every day we have more evidence that the guy truly isn't fit to serve. So if the correct course of action is removal, then it's removal. But the idea that I'm carefully crafting the narrative of the show to have maximum appeal at any given time, if that was the case, I would have come up with dishonest positions on other issues that would have been more palatable to our audience, right? On circumcision, a lot of our audience doesn't like my position on circumcision. Right. If I wanted to take the path of least resistance, I would lie about my position on circumcision, which is, according to medical experts, benefits outweigh the risks. I could have picked a different position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict if I didn't want to irritate some people on the left, or on Venezuela. These are all areas where if the MO of this program was do what is going to just be most appealing to people, then I would have taken very different positions all along. If I've never done it before, why would I start with Trump? So I find the criticism to be totally bogus, but you're right. We're doing way better because Trump won and Hillary lost. That's true.
Yeah, and we've been upfront about that. I remember when the tax plan was being debated, we said that this could actually be good for the David Pakman Show, but we're opposed to it because it's bad for the country.
No question about it. The pass-through income provisions are good for anyone who owns an S corporation like the David Pakman Show, but morally I was opposed to that. So anyway, give it a rest, all right? We're not changing the show, and we haven't changed the show because of any of these whims. I'm just doing the show and doing every story the way I see it. There are some attempts being made to pull me into some really childish YouTube drama. I don't even want to go through it all with you because it's so dumb, and I don't even fully understand it since I'm kind of busy producing a show every weekday, and I have limited time to go through really long Twitter threads. But basically, over the weekend, a YouTuber had a debate that included white nationalist Richard Spencer and Carl Benjamin, a YouTuber who goes by the name Sargon of Akkad, and some others. I don't even know who, right? The debate, I think, was like 3 or 4 hours long. It was on the channel of a guy named Andrew Wartsky, or Warski. And I somehow got tagged into tweets about the debate, even though I wasn't in the debate. I don't know why I was initially tagged into it, but I recognized that name, Andrew Warski, and I checked my email archives, and I was actually a few months ago offered $1,500 to debate him on the internet, and I posted a tweet about that. I just said, oh, that's interesting. I was actually invited to be on a live stream debate with Andy Warski, and was offered $1,500 to do it. It felt so sketchy, in other words, I didn't necessarily believe I'd get paid, that I said, sure, money up front, and never heard back. I wonder if Richard Spencer, Sargon, or others on that abortion of a debate were offered the same. It was completely true, right? I was offered the $1,500. I found the debate to be an abortion because it was just completely uncontrolled and people talking over each other. And I don't know that anything absolutely was learned. And people went nuts. This Andrew Worski guy did a video filled with ad hominems about me. There's a YouTuber named something like Sticks and My Hammer, something like that. He did a video making fun of my physical appearance, which is weird since he's got a peculiar look himself, but because that's not really an argument, right? Like attacking my physical appearance is not an argument.
Ad hominem.
And my tweet feed just filled with drama from tons of people I don't even know. And I've had to start just muting people by the dozens to clear out my Twitter feed. So anyway, I have a decision to make here. I think it's all total nonsense. I don't care about these people. They're arguing about arguing and doing nothing productive in terms of debating actual ideas. But I know, Pat, that if I chose to get involved in this drama, that I could get a lot of attention for the show, right? There's that saying, all publicity is good publicity. If I just started responding to every one of these people really aggressively, it would get a lot of attention, but is it worth it, right? Like I can only spend so much time in one day doing all the things related to the show that I could do, social media being one of them. I get how clickbait media works, right? It's much easier for me to just argue with people about nothing online than to research a story for the show. But I don't think that's what our core audience wants.
There are only so many hours in the day. There are only so much time in the show, too. And I think it has to do with one of those things where you don't really want to punch down too much. I mean, there are people who make entire video series and channels and playlists dedicated entirely to just hating the David Pakman Show.
Right. It's a cottage industry that has developed around just making videos, quote, debunking our clips. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. For now, I'm just muting these people and going along with my day. But if you think it would be interesting to see me start mixing it up on Twitter, let me know. But my instinct is most people in the audience would rather us talk about politics and analyze issues and ideas. I told you this was coming in late 2017, and it is growing. As of yesterday, there are 30 senators co-sponsoring a bill to repeal the repeal of net neutrality, or I guess to reinstate Obama's net neutrality provisions. And those are provisions that by and large are really well liked by Americans. It's the cable companies and their lobbyists and big corporations, some big corporations only, who have been advocating for the removal of those net neutrality provisions. Lawmakers have 60 legislative days after the FCC submits its regulations to Congress to pass what's called a Congressional Review Act reversal. The Congressional Review Act allows Congress to reverse the decision made by the FCC if they do it within 60 legislative days. So it's great news that now there are 30 co-sponsors to this repeal of net neutrality in the Senate. It means that now it is going to get a full vote on the Senate floor, but I hate to be the messenger of bad news, it's still going to fail because this is just Democrats, right? The Republicans have the majority. They are not going to be able, Democrats are not going to be able to undo what Trump's FCC has done, even if the Republican constituents want net neutrality, even if their constituents will be hurt by internet service providers being able to do whatever the hell they want. It doesn't matter because only Democrats are going to vote for this. And like we've said before, this is a political stunt, but it might be the type of political stunt that has some utility in the 2018 midterms and in the 2020 election, because there will now be a record of senators who, given the opportunity to restore net neutrality, will have either abstained or voted not to restore net neutrality. That can be used against them in upcoming campaigns. Now, there's lots of people in the audience, last time I mentioned this effort, who said, David, this is a great thing no matter what. And I agree, it's good. But it could also be easily deflated by Republicans who take the small government approach where they say, listen, President Trump appointed Ajit Pai, former Verizon lawyer. The FCC has made its decision. We're not now going to go against the will of that body. So I genuinely don't know of what value it will be in the 2018 and 2020 elections. What I do know is any publicity that can be given to net neutrality, I'm in favor of.
I'm actually a little bit more hopeful than you are on this one because I think you take those 49 Democrats, right? Then you add in John Thune from South Dakota, a Republican who said that he's actually in favor of some of the net neutrality provisions. and then maybe add in some of those Republicans who are on their way out, like Bob Corker or Jeff Flake or
I don't
John
see it.
McCain. You could get something there.
I don't see I just don't see.
But then I understand it's not going to pass the House. The president's not going to sign it.
Absolutely. So, the bottom line is the FCC is a disgustingly political organization. It's not there for the benefit of the public. It's been completely co-opted. The term regulatory capture could not apply to any agency more than it applies to the FCC. Former Verizon lawyer Ajit Pai, appointed by Trump, he now is running the FCC. So it's necessary for the public to activate against the FCC rather than being able to count on the FCC to defend your interests. And that is horrible. And it's a good reminder of do not fall for both sides are the same. Yeah, there are many issues where there are no sort of practical, operational, meaningful differences between Republicans and Democrats. One example is the sort of implicit or tacit support for the status quo of how politics are funded in the U.S. That's true. Democrats and Republicans, very similar. But Democrats are all going to vote to restore net neutrality, and Republicans are not, with the exception of maybe the couple that Pat is talking about, although I don't really see it happening. There are important differences between Republicans and Democrats, and this is one of them.
Interestingly, on the state level, Nebraska is considering putting something forward that would protect some of these net neutrality provisions.
I saw that.
And even though it's controlled by Republicans, it still has a good chance of passing. But I think it's because they're on the state level and thus much less corrupted than on the federal level.
That could be done in other states, but we're not yet seeing any big hunger for that. So it's great that there's 30 co-sponsors. Sadly, it's not going to pass. Let's take a break. We will speak to Don Jeffries after the break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm pleased to welcome to the program today Don Jeffries, who's author of the new book, Survival of the Richest, which looks at the issue of wealth disparity and income inequality, a topic we've been talking about for a long time. Don, why do you feel this is such an important issue in the world today, wealth disparity?
Well, I think it's the most important issue in America and the world. When you have the disparity of wealth we have, which right now we just recently learned that half of America, 50%, earns $27,000 a year or less. And we already knew that same half, the bottom half of Americans, have less than 1% of the collective wealth. I don't think you can have a first world economy or a first world nation with that kind of glowing disparity of wealth.
And why not? In other words, in practice, what are the negative repercussions of having such wealth inequality?
Well, you have to have people be able to buy things, to purchase things, and if you have to understand because we have such a dwindling safety net. I mean, Republicans especially want to eliminate what benefits are left out there. You have to have people be able to survive. We're not back in the old days of being able to foraging for your own food and living off the land and so forth. So you have tons of people. We also have more people on government benefits right now than we do have working. So we have a society, we have to figure out how we're going to handle this, because you're either going to consign people to lives of poverty and death if they starve to death or freeze to death if they don't have housing, or you're going to have to come up with some kind of universal basic income, or you're going to have to really be serious about bringing jobs back and bringing factories back and having full employment.
So let's take a few of those pieces one at a time. I have not heard this data about, you said there's more people on government benefits than working today. Talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, that was widely disseminated within the last, 6 months or years. Actually, probably was when I was even writing Survival of the Richest. It's just a fact with all the, obviously, people on Social Security. There's lots of people on Social Security disability, just various benefits, getting Medicare, Medicaid, whatever. And especially with the baby boomers retiring increasingly, you're going to eventually have not enough people working probably to be able to support the baby boomers. So they have to figure
So in
out
other words, all retired persons who receive Social Security, which of course they paid into, now are skewing those numbers. Understood. Let's talk about you mentioned the bringing back of manufacturing jobs. This has been sort of a political football for a long time, and every good analysis I've read really points to the reality that a lot of those jobs that did at some point leave the U.S. aren't coming back because increasingly they don't exist anymore. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I understand that's one of the answers, and that may be true. And if that is true, that we can't bring back even a sizable portion of those old jobs, then we have to look at other alternatives, especially when you look at the artificial technology that's coming in. The robots are going to be taking who knows how many millions of jobs. So I think that's when we have to look at, and I know Americans hate to hear the universal basic income thing, but you have to come up with some way. If the jobs aren't there, you have to have some way for people to support themselves.
In the book, you talk about how a lot of Americans don't really get how it is that the system is rigged against them, and how there are a lot of mechanisms that basically funnel or channel money upward. And there's a lot of people in the US, particularly on the American right, who claim to be against the redistribution of wealth, usually in the form of using taxes on the rich to pay for social welfare benefits for the not rich. But there's this other redistribution that goes on all the time that's an upward redistribution. Can you talk about how that works?
Yeah, it's everything. I mean, you look at the NFL with all the problems they've had recently, all the stadiums that have been built at taxpayer expense. I mean, this is the greatest corporate welfare imaginable, where you have billionaires that basically come crying to the public and say, I want you to build my stadium for me. And that's the absolute opposite of so-called risk capitalism, because they're not taking any risk. They're basically threatening to move the team if the public doesn't finance their stadium, and the public invariably does, even if they don't want to, because their representatives are beholden to these billionaires and not beholden to the people.
In a way, they're kind of socializing the risk of these projects while setting themselves up to then claim the profits as part of the entrepreneurial capitalist system, are they not?
Yeah, socialism works for them. It works very wonderfully for them. And as I put out in the book also, they all kinds of rich people get tons and tons of freebies and celebrities. Talk about farm subsidies and things like that. And I have the we can't go into it here, but I have all those statistics and names in my book. And the system is rigged for the rich, and even the lower class Americans don't seem to mind that as much. If you try to talk about corporate welfare to them, they invariably talk about their neighbor that's on food stamps, or somebody they saw at the store on food stamps, or how big their TV is. That's what they're concerned about, mythical welfare queens, and they don't care about the billionaires not paying taxes.
So part of being able to continue rigging the system in this way involves a PR campaign that, as you are pointing out, puts the attention on the food stamp recipient, for example. And a lot of people in our audience probably are familiar with, you mentioned these imaginary welfare queens, the infamous Ronald Reagan story of a woman with a Cadillac, whatever, right? I don't even remember the exact details. We know it's been debunked. Talk a little bit about how far back this campaign goes, influencing the average American to sort of direct their ire and anger at the imaginary welfare queen, the food stamp recipient, whoever else. How far back does that go?
Well, I think it began in earnest under Reagan, as you talk about with the welfare queen campaign. And the right at that time began to change. And I went into a little bit more of this in Hidden History, my previous book, where the right changed from being anti-communist and concerned about that to being basically Ayn Rand disciples. And a lot of this, we see this in Paul Ryan, especially today, whose hero is Ayn Rand. A lot of these Republicans are. And Ayn Rand taught that greed is good. And one of her quotes was, we have no obligation to take care of our neighbors. And the people like Paul Ryan and others are really beholden to her beliefs. And you can read the quotes I have in the book about that. But it's a deadly philosophy. I mean, parts of it are good because individual liberty is important. But when you have individual liberty at the expense of the whole, where you just completely ignore your neighbors, which is what this philosophy entails. It's kind of a rugged individualism that might have worked in the Wild West, but it can't work in our modern day age unless you want to go back to those days. And again, you're going to have people dead in the streets, and you're not going to have a first world country.
Is that part of the issue with the more sort of absolutist libertarian ideals, which when you read about them framed in a way that's sort of eloquent and articulate, it can be very, very appealing, but it's sort of divorced from the realities of humans no longer being like in a state of nature and having society?
Yeah, and I have a lot of libertarian in me. I mean, I loved Ron Paul. I mean, I love the foreign policy of libertarians. I love the fact that they're the only people out there pretty much who are emphasizing civil liberties and allowing us to have our rights under the Bill of Rights. But when you carry it into the domestic arena, they're very unrealistic because they act as if it's insignificant that half the country basically has nothing. And I stress that over and over again. That's half the country, and with each new wave of immigration that comes in, it comes in at the bottom level, so that those people entering the country are desperately poor, and so they're making that bottom 50% figure grow and grow because they're obviously not adding any wealth to the country, and that group already has no wealth. So you have to be able to distribute that wealth a little bit, at least a little bit more fairly. And we see back into the golden age, what we consider the golden age of America, like the 1950s, the top tax rate was 90%. Now, I don't want to necessarily go back to that, but that's when things seemed to run more smoothly, because the rich at that time still had all their loopholes and plenty that didn't pay taxes, but things were distributed more fairly, and you didn't have the CEO worker disparity of income that we have now. Back then, they weren't CEOs; they were presidents of the companies. Many times, they had founded the company, so they had a vested stake in it, an interest in it, and they also had more civic pride, and they cared a little bit more about how things ran outside of their own profit margins and their own size of their bonuses.
How would you fix this issue? Because very often you will get some buy-in when people hear you sort of identify the problem. And let's say we get buy-in that we all agree, yeah, this is a problem. There's a lot of negative externalities to such significant income and wealth inequality. We kind of agree on that. There will be a significant contingent that is opposed to just what they would call unreasonable levels of taxation in order to redistribute. So is taxation one of the paths that you would identify? Is it the path? How do you fix the problem?
Well, I'm a Huey Long disciple. As you know, I have a whole chapter devoted to Huey Long in the book, and I really would try to go back to his Share of the Wealth program, which people don't realize. They called him a communist and so forth. The first $1 million of income, and this is in the 1930s, which would be like 12 million now, would not have been taxed. So basically, no one but the 1% of the 1% win. People don't realize how much wealth is concentrated at the top. We don't even know, because we don't know how much wealth exactly is in these tax-free foundations. I would go after that the way Huey Long did. I would also follow the recommendations of the Grace Commission in the 1980s, which found that fully 1/3 of all government spending is completely wasted. So we could cut taxes by 1/3 and spending by 1/3 at least. And it's probably more waste by now, in the ensuing years, without anyone, how can anybody possibly object to that? I would means test Social Security. I would start taxing all Social Security income. Most people don't realize the regressive Social Security tax.
Well, let's talk about that one, though, if we can, Don, because I
Sure.
think that when it comes to Social Security, there's a number of different sort of mathematical problems we can identify. And I think that the idea of lifting or removing the cap, so for people who don't know, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, it's around 100, you pay Social Security tax on the first 120,000 or so of income per year. Right. Is that roughly the number, 123?
That's right.
Something along those lines. Anything you earn beyond that, you no longer pay into Social Security. But of course, the benefits that you're going to get out of Social Security upon retirement also reach a cap. So one way to have a huge influx of money into the Social Security system would be to double, triple, quadruple, or even eliminate that cap altogether. Now, right. I would be up for discussing that, but I think if you do that, it's going to be very difficult to also argue for means testing Social Security, particularly when the benefits are not particularly extravagant. I think if you do one, which I agree with, I don't know about the means testing part.
Well, I mean, either would be great. I'd like to have both. But Ross Perot back in 1992 tried to fly the idea of voluntary means testing. As he said, I don't need Social Security. And the AARP and the lobbies, typical lobbies, shot him down. So I think at the very least, the people that are conscious, all these people like Warren Buffett that claim, tax me more and whatever, at least publicly, they would have to say, I don't need Social Security, Bill Gates and so forth. Mm-hmm. So I think there's no reason for those people to have Social Security. And I agree, means testing, it's a very extreme measure, but this is what happened. We go back to the days of LBJ when they first started dipping into the Social Security fund. It was supposed to be a separate fund, and then it really went overboard during the Reagan years. The great tax cut cut taxes for the top 1%, but he raised Social Security taxes dramatically, and he started taxing Social Security benefits. It's ironic that the great tax cutter was the one who decided to double tax people on Social Security, and we still have that system today. So there's all these things could be rolled dialed back. And it's not going to be an easy fix overnight. I realize a Huey Long type fix is probably impractical because people just kind of roll your eyes when you say that. But we need something. We need something to try to get the wealth out, spread out to the great mass of people, and you have to go where the wealth is. So any kind of conventional tax system that the Democrats would devise is not going to work, because that's why Huey Long was so dangerous to people, because he wasn't like an FDR, an LBJ, or Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. He wanted to go right after the absolute top 1%, and that's why if you look at the quotes about him today, the left can't stand him when he should have been their ideal hero, but he wasn't, because he wasn't playing this game of creating a big bureaucracy and middlemen and so forth. And we can see the war on poverty, if it had actually been waged correctly, the way LBJ was going to wage it, it would have been won and not lost so dramatically as it has been.
Don, the book is fascinating. It's called Survival of the Richest. We've been speaking with the book's author, Don Jeffries. Thanks so much for talking to us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
It's been a rough go for President Donald Trump with the football world. He first was pushing against the totally valid expressions of free speech that were taking place when NFL football players were kneeling or doing other types of protests during the national anthems before games a couple months ago. And now it's carrying over into the college football world. Yesterday was the college football playoff national championship game between Alabama and Georgia. Alabama ultimately defeated Georgia 26-23. And one of Alabama's players, although it's not 100% sure who, was caught on camera yelling F Trump as the players went out onto the field. It just so happens Donald Trump was at this game, but more on that later. Here comes the Alabama team. And initially it was alleged that it was Bo Scarborough who yelled, although he has since denied that it was him. And here's what was heard during the very, very riled up jog out to the field. Right. Let's play it once more for people. Again, I'm not going to say exactly what he said. We are considering these fleeting expletives that we hope mercy will be taken upon us for broadcasting. But here's one more time what it was that was said. Right. So immediately, all the normal stuff you would expect started, right? Some people saying, hey, this is free speech period. No other discussion to be had. Others saying this is a thug, no doubt racial overtones there, as we're very acquainted with. Others saying this player, whoever it was disrespectful to the office of the presidency, if not to Trump himself. Yet other people saying that he was a poor representative of the University of Alabama. And again, Pat, we don't really know who did this. The player accused was Bo Scarborough, but he's denying that it was him who said it.
He denies it, but obviously he could face some retribution from the school, or this could hurt his draft potential too in the NFL if he was to go there.
Yeah, I don't know ultimately what the truth is, but I actually don't know how anyone on the side of the Trumpists can credibly criticize this when it is quite literally locker room talk, right? Remember when, it's so funny, when Trump talked about grab him by the you-know-what, it happened on a tour bus before filming a TV show in, I think, Los Angeles or something. And Trump said, oh, that was locker room talk. That was a stretch then. This was a football player literally exiting a locker room before a football game. If anything has ever been locker room talk, it's this, Bo Scarborough or whoever it was yelling F Trump. Anyway, I hope the headlines tomorrow aren't Bo Scarborough receives multiple death threats as a result of what he said.
Yeah, I'm worried that Donald Trump will confuse Bo Scarborough with Joe Scarborough, maybe call him like Crazy Bo.
Yeah, he thinks this is the guy who was there when Mika was bleeding badly from a bad facelift or whatever it was that President Trump said about her. Interesting things happening in Alabama, though. A couple of weeks ago, they elected Democrat to the Senate, and now this. But seriously, I'm not offended by this at all. Whether you care or not, what a football player or a celebrity or an actor thinks about the president, that's one thing. I genuinely don't really care. But it is absolutely fine to use whatever venue you have to express your opinions. Now, it might have consequences, right?
Sure.
Freedom of speech is not freedom from the consequences of that speech. And when a football player or an actor or whoever chooses to go political, people might not support them. They might not buy tickets to the sporting event or buy a ticket to the movie or whatever. But how can anyone really be offended by this?
Yeah, I'm sure he wasn't thinking about all that when he said that comment, but he probably didn't think that it was going to be captured on television either.
Maybe not. Yeah, who knows? Let's now get to the other story from the Alabama-Georgia football game involving Donald Trump. I know this is a weird thing to be talking about, but the video evidence is what's making me ask this question. Does Donald Trump know the words to the United States national anthem? Does the patriotic 71-year-old American, Donald Trump, who's been patriotically singing the national anthem his whole life, like any good Republican would do, does he know the words? Did he ever, or has he forgotten them? And as I mentioned earlier, Trump was at the college football championship game last night between Alabama and Georgia. One highlight from the game was actually before the game when an Alabama player, possibly Bo Scarborough, yelled F Trump. But another highlight took place before the game during the singing of the national anthem. Trump went out on the field, flanked by military service members, of course, and it appeared that for long stretches of the national anthem, he didn't know the words. He sort of seemed to be wanting to sing along. I'm going to play the video for you. If you're listening, I'll describe to you what it is that we're seeing, and if you're watching with me, you'll see that there are periods where Trump just generally looks confused and stops singing altogether, kind of unsure what to say. Let's take a look at a little bit of this. You knew those couple words. Yeah, that was a good spot for him. I think they're cheering for him. Okay. My question is, all right, in the context of football, if kneeling during the national anthem is disgraceful, if being off the field during the national anthem is disrespectful, if protesting during the anthem in any way makes you a son of a bitch, as Donald Trump once said, what is this? Now, I want to be clear, Pat. I don't actually think this is that big of a deal. I doubt I could tell you the lyrics to the full national anthem. I might come close. I couldn't tell you the words to the Argentinian national anthem. I don't think it's a big deal. But in Trump's world, by his internal logic that he's established, respecting the anthem is of paramount importance. If Obama had done this and seemed to flub the words, it would be 24/7 on right-wing media, foreigner, non-citizen Obama bungles anthem lyrics. But when it's Trump, I guess it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, so then Trump doesn't have the grounds to criticize others, and there's no chance that he knows what the Star Spangled Banner's about, too. Could he name the war that the song was made for? Probably not.
I think that's actually a more interesting question, which is for all the people who hold the national anthem in a sort of way, the same sort of way they hold the Constitution, almost like some kind of sacred text. What's more important, knowing the words or actually understanding the meaning and context in which it was written? I would argue the latter, but bottom line, I don't think that this is hugely important, but it does point to two items of interest. Number one, Trump's ongoing hypocrisy when it comes to what's okay for others to do versus what it's okay for him to do. And number two, when it comes to the cognitive decline question, did he know the words to the national anthem at one point and since has forgotten them, which would not exactly bolster the framework of a very, very stable genius.
Maybe that part of the song was outside of his vocal range, you know?
That could be, yeah, because he's a baritone, right?
Oh, sure.
I have no idea. We've got a voicemail number, 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail that came in. Let's take a listen to it.
Hey, David. My name is Kelly. I am calling from Indiana. It's my first time calling, but I've been listening to you for a while.
Okay.
I've recently heard that you went on a trip to Indiana.
Right.
And I just want to let you know, not everybody from Indiana is like that. There are, I would say, a few progressives that aren't Trumpists in Indiana. So, yeah, just wanted to clarify. Indiana's not an all bad state. Thank you.
Right. No, I knew that. I did meet one person who wasn't a Trumpist during my trip in Indiana out of about 50 or 60. But I know that Indianapolis actually is, comparatively speaking, relative to the rest of the state, there's a lot of lefty stuff going on in Indianapolis.
Yes. Hashtag not all Indianians.
Not all. Isn't it Indianans?
I like that better.
Indianians.
And I like how
That
she
doesn't-
says there are a few reasonable people
Yeah.
out of, like the millions that live in Indiana overall.
Yeah. No, I believe it. I believe it. There are absolutely reasonable people in the great state of Indiana. Mike Pence, not one of those people. Great bonus show for you today. DavidPakman.com/membership to get access. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show will also get you access.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.